And he said, there was a man who had two sons. And the younger of them said to his father, Father, give me the share of the property that is coming to me. And he divided his property between them. Not many days later, the younger son gathered all he had and took a journey into a far country. And there he squandered his property in reckless living. And when he had spent everything, a severe famine across that country, and when he had spent everything, a severe famine arose in that country, and he began to be in need. So he went and hired himself out to one of the citizens of that country, and who sent him into his fields to feed pigs. And he was longing to be fed with the pods that the pigs ate. No one gave him anything. But when he came to himself, he said, How many of my father's hired servants have more than enough bread, but I perish here with hunger? I will rise and go to my father, and I will say to him, Father, I have sinned against heaven and before you. I am no longer worthy to be called your son. Treat me as one of your hired servants. And he arose and came to his father, but while he was still a long way off, his father saw him and felt compassion, and ran and embraced and kissed him. And the son said to him, Father, I have sinned against heaven before you. I am no longer worthy to be called your son. But the father said, Bring quickly the best robe and put it on him, and put a ring on his hand and shoes on his feet. And bring the fatted calf and kill it, and let us eat and celebrate. For this my son was dead and is alive again. He was lost and is found. And they began to celebrate. Oh, that's a great story. That's a fantastic story. What a happy ending. Not. Now his older son was in the field, and he came and drew near to his house. He heard music and dancing, and he called one of the servants and asked what these things meant. And he said to him, Your brother has come, and your father has killed the fatted calf, because he received him back safe and sound. But he was angry and refused to go in. His father came out and entreated him. But he answered his father, Look, these many years I have served you, and I never disobeyed your command. Yet you never gave me a young goat, that I might celebrate with my friends. But when this son of yours came, who has devoured your property with prostitutes, you killed the fatted calf for him. And he said to him, Son, you are always with me, and all that is mine is yours. It was fitting to celebrate and be glad, for your brother was dead and is alive. He was lost and is found. What an interesting story. Starting in verse 11, Jesus says, coming from Luke chapter 15, starting in verse 11, Jesus says, there was a man who had two sons. One of the sons, the older one, he was quiet and he was comfortable where he was living, more conservative. But the younger son, he was reckless. He wanted to get out there and explore, have adventure, find his own dreams, his own aspirations. When the younger son said to his father, Father, give me my share of the inheritance, or as the ESV says, Father, give me the share of property that is coming to me. It's interesting, back in this day, if a son would ask his father for his share of the inheritance, the son would die. Because that is the most disrespectful, the most dishonorable thing you can ask of your father before he died. Interestingly enough, the father agreed to it. So not many days later, the younger son gathered all he had and took a journey into a far country. It doesn't say where he went. It just says that he left for somewhere distant. There he squandered his property in reckless living. In some versions it says he was prodigal. Right? And the word prodigal literally means to be wasteful. When he had spent everything, a severe famine arose in the country, and he began to be in need. It doesn't say when. It doesn't say how. All it says that a severe famine arose in that country. So he went and he hired himself out to one of the citizens of the country, who sent him into his fields to feed pigs. Feeding a pig was the lowest you can get in a job. Now there are people who had the good jobs because they had the connections to get those good jobs when this famine arose. Those who didn't have any connections went so low as to feed pigs, which was the lowest. He became so hungry that he wanted to eat what the pigs were eating. That's disgusting. Do you know what slop looks like? That's what pigs eat, is slop. It's this mushy leftover food mixed with liquids of some sort. Probably water and milk and whatever else they had left over that went bad. The pigs ate that. It's disgusting. Ugh. But when he came to himself, notice this. But when he came to his senses, some translations say. See, before he was his prodigal son, and he didn't really understand what the real world was like. He was ambitious. He was very reckless in his lifestyle. He just wanted to go out there and just explore, just find the world. But it was very different than what he expected. Verse 17, it says, but when he came to himself, he was at the lowest of lows. That's when he humbled himself. That's when he finally realized that his father's servants had more food than he had at that moment. Yet he sits there dying because he's hungry. So he says to himself, I will rise and I will go to my father. And instead of gloating at my father, and instead of belittling my father, I'm going to say to my father, Father, I've sinned against heaven and before you. I'm no longer worthy to be called your son. Make me one of your hired servants. He's saying, Dad, I don't deserve to be called your son. I don't want to be called your son. Instead, make me a servant. Make me a servant so I can pay you back. So he goes. He gets up and he leaves. He heads for home. He's a long way from home. So he goes and his father sees him. While he was still a long way off. He was way far in the distance. Maybe, I don't know, maybe a mile or so, I want to say. And it's funny, I can picture this 80-year-old man running like a 20-year-old. Like, it's just full speed. You know, like he's young again. You know, this old guy who's acting like he's young because he's just that excited to see his son home again. And so he sees his father, and his father approaches him, and the son starts saying what he rehearsed throughout that long journey home. Father, I've sinned against heaven before you. I'm no longer worthy to be called your son. But yet the father stops him. The father stops him, and he hugs him, and he kisses him, and he embraces him. and he welcomes him home as his son. And the father says, "Bring quickly the best robe." The robe covered his shame. Put on the ring on his finger. The ring established family authority. Put shoes on his feet. The shoes on his feet meant that he wasn't a servant. Meant that he was a son. Kill the fatted calf. Let's have a feast. The feast represented a welcome back. And they began to celebrate. The feast was tremendous. The celebration was extraordinary. There's just one problem. Jealousy engulfed the older son. Now his older son was in the field, and he came and drew near to the house and heard the music and dancing. And he called one of his servants. "Hey, Joe, what's going on in there?" "Well, you see, sire, your brother's come home. Your dad has put on him a robe and a ring on his finger and sandals on his feet. And they killed the fatted calf, the fattest calf. And they're having a party in there to welcome back your brother." Ha! This made the older son, all the more angry. So his father came out, and he tried to get the son to join the party, but the son refused. And notice what the son says. The son says, "Look, father, these many years I have served you." Not only was the older son a son, but he also was a servant. He served his father and never disobeyed your command, ever, not once. Yet you never gave me a young goat so I can bring my friends in and celebrate with them. Notice in verse 30 what the older son says to his father. This son of yours. Notice he doesn't say, "My brother." No. He's not even claiming him as his own blood anymore. He's saying, "This son of yours, who came in, he asked for your inheritance that was owed to him after you were supposed to be dead. He squandered it. He was prodigal with it. And he comes back and you treat him like this?" The father says to him, "Son, you are always with me. And all that is mine is yours." It was fitting to celebrate and be glad. Notice what the father says here in verse 32. He says, "This brother of yours," your brother. The son says, "This son of yours," but the father says, "This brother of yours. He was dead and he's alive. He was lost and he's found." It's interesting. A lot. That's how God is. You know. It's how God is. First we're in God's house, but then when we sin, we go away from God's house, and then the more we sin, the further we get from God's house, and that's that long that distant country that we go to. But then we realize that we sinned. That we're no longer worthy to be called a child of God, but we are a sinner to man. We're dead in sin, but alive in Christ. So then we decide to come back to God through baptism, and we decide to once again be in the house of God, and we want to be called a child of God because that title alone has its rewards. So then we're baptized and we enter into the God's house once again. But before that, God sees us. He hears us mumbling, I've sinned against heaven and before you, and I am no longer worthy to be called your son. I don't even deserve to be in heaven with you. But you know what God does? God runs and He embraces us, and He kisses us, and He hugs us, and He holds us, and He cherishes us. And He calls us son. He calls us daughter. He calls us family. Isn't that awesome? How cool would it be to be called a son by God? By God, the creator of the universe, the creator of everything that you see. Solid, liquid, gas. How awesome is that? To be called a child of God. Mind blowing. Run back to God if you've left. Because God will run to you. He will run as fast as He can. I'm CJ Arnold. You've heard the word.